Hey, hello there, everyone. Hi, my name is Luke Thomas. It is the 31st of July, 2022, and normally we do these right after the fights, late into the night. But last night I was unable to do that. Brian Campbell, my co-host of Morning Kombat, was on vacation. And so I wanted to get up something today rather than nothing. And I traveled back home. I was in New York City yesterday covering the Danny Garcia Jose Benavidez Jr. fight for Showtime. I realized that MMA is the vast majority of what I cover, but it is not the only thing that I cover. Boxing plays a role as well. So I'm sorry we couldn't get something for you guys live yesterday. It just really wasn't in the cards, unfortunately. And just as a sort of a way to assuage any concerns, this kind of thing is pretty rare. It's pretty rare, right? Where the boxing will kind of take over MMA, and even then, that we won't have some kind of normal semblance of coverage. But it was kind of a perfect storm where it just wasn't really in the cards. So apologies for that, but here we are. I hope you're doing well. MK is going to be live tomorrow. It'll be me and UFC Hall of Famer Sugar Rashad Evans. We'll go over everything in detail, plus the cancellation of the Jake Paul fight. We'll talk about that as well, and a whole lot of other things. But today, on this program, I have not watched the entirety of UFC 277, but I watched certainly the big chunks of it, and I want to go ahead and get this video up because it's already 3 p.m. on the East Coast, and needed to get up, right? Needed to do it right now. So thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for your patience. It is also greatly appreciated. Thank you for being a friend. You get the idea. Okay. I mean, the spoilers are already out, so the normal disclaimers I won't really do. There's really no point to that. I don't see the need for it. But let's talk about the two title fights from UFC 277. In part because they were pretty great. They were pretty great. I saw some folks saying that Nunes versus Peña 2, or yeah, whatever, was one of the the best women's fight ever. Like, on what fucking planet is that? I mean, it was a good fight and it was fun. It was definitely really fun and brutal, crazy brutal. But I don't know if it's in the league of like very best women's fights. It's one of the most dominant fights I've seen. That's for sure. Tremendous job by Amanda Nunes, no doubt about that. But while exciting and great and laudable in many ways, I think the categorization of this as one of the best women's, or as the best women's fight ever, is flatly not true. I don't know who was saying that. I saw MMA Junkie had some collection of folks saying it. I didn't even look, but I'm reading the headlines and thinking, what the fuck is that? That doesn't make a lot of sense. I am washed, as you guys well know. I'm also exhausted. I haven't slept. And so if this analysis is terrible, I apologize. No, it'll be okay. All right, so let's talk about this. Amanda Nunes defeats Julianna Peña via unanimous decision, but this was a one-way ass-kicking by and large. Although it's kind of funny, if you actually look at Amanda's face afterwards, I think under her right eye, she had a really bad swelling, and she got marked up. Like, there were moments where Peña, with the armbar in the fourth, which we'll talk about, and then some other moments where she kind of, she did okay. But in general, it was one-way traffic. All right, so the scores are as follows. Listen to this. 50-45, 50-44, 50-43. Now, as a matter, I always do it on Fridays. BC makes me. I don't like doing predictions for this very reason. But we did them, and I thought Peña was going to repeat as a champ, and that is just utterly wrong. So let's start right up front with that. Totally, completely wrong. BC thought Peña would win. Shouts to him. He got it right. Although, conversely, he thought Kai Kara France would win, and he didn't. I thought Moreno would win, so we kind of split the difference there. You got a case for all four fighters, I suppose, in the end. But as it relates to the main event, totally wrong. Boy, I got to tell you why I was wrong. A few reasons. Several. I remember exactly where I was when GSP lost to Matt Serra. At the time, I had begun writing MMA stuff. I had taken over BloodyElbow.com as the editor-in-chief around February of 2007, somewhere along those lines. And I think that fight was like in April, something like that, like not long afterwards. And I was at Hard Times Cafe in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which, by the way, I don't even think exists anymore. I think it's some other place now. it was a seminal moment. It was really, really informative, and it's just an impossible thing to forget, just to watch GSP get his lights put out, or he tapped strikes, but, to get dropped and hurt in the way that he was. It was totally insane. And a lot of people wanted to compare this one to that. I saw that folks had they'd done some media with St. Pierre in the week up to this fight, talking about this as like the two are being comparable. But the real big difference for me was, I think that fight was in 2007, right? So, that was 15 years ago. If my math is right, St. Pierre was something like 25 or 26 years old. There was a real big difference. Amanda Nunes, by contrast, currently sits at 34. So part of the reason I was wrong is because for a guy like St. Pierre, who was just so athletic and so dominant and 26 years old, it just felt like he was going to be able to come up with something different or get back to his original strengths or leverage any of his existing abilities, given his youth and his athleticism and everything else, to do that correctly. And we've been living it through an era where a lot of guys, when they drop off, they've been dropping off precipitously. Now, not quite at 34, but I was working under the assumption that at 34, with all the stuff she's been through and all the acclaim that she's achieved and everything else, that I don't know if she's going to fall off a cliff, but that getting back to the title picture at a bare minimum at bantamweight was going to be a struggle for her. It just wasn't. Not at all. This was extremely impressive from her in a lot of different ways, man. In a lot of different ways. First of all, like, her cardio was on point. And not just was her cardio on point, but like, she apportioned it correctly. The decision-making she had in this fight, the game planning she had in this fight, the physical preparation she had in this fight far exceeded what I thought was possible at this stage for her. Very, just again, me totally wrong, her completely impressive. The two are directly correlated. For as good as she looked, that's how off I was. And so I really want to make sure that I'm honest with the audience about that, and I'm upfront and I acknowledge it. But how did she do it? Well, again, first of all, she looked to be in tremendous physical condition. I thought she made good choices about what to do offensively. The two big things that stood out to me were basically in the first half, maybe 3/5 of the fight, standing largely at southpaw. This gave Julianna Peña all kinds of trouble. I saw Valentina Shevchenko say that, she borrowed my game plan, but that's not really true. Like, that fight was mostly just clinching along the fence, or then there were various moments where each one was, kind of on top or on bottom from takedowns along the fence line. There was a little bit where Shevchenko was standing at southpaw, and I guess she did fine, but there wasn't any extended, prolonged period where that was happening. Certainly not like this anyway. So, she's probably just more fishing for a trilogy fight, which I'd love to see, but I don't know how fair that comparison actually is. This one was a sustained effort, by and large, at southpaw, and she did really well. And to me, there were moments where Peña was able to land a couple of decent times, largely off Peña's, because she's standing orthodox, right. When she had lead outside foot positioning, she could come in and then sometimes get her head off the center line and then throw straight down with her right hand and get through a little bit. But the real big lesson there was she mostly charges in straight lines. There was some feinting going on, but Nunes didn't really buy it. She was able to see basically everything in front of her. And the right check hook was killing her. Or even when Amanda would switch, she would throw a right hook from the rear hand and catch her, constantly catching in. And what was she not doing with her? She wasn't jabbing with her like the last time. It turns out if she had followed a similar kind of game plan from the last fight, maybe it would have gone in a similar direction. But she switched everything up, which was funny because to me, it looked like Peña was still trying to fight the first fight the second time around. Amanda Nunes was not. She was fighting a brand new fight in this one. And it's just what a champion she is. What a champion. Really, 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 really surprising to me because of what I thought was possible, but probably not surprising to anyone around her. I think it does sort of underscore that some of her complaints about what was happening around her the first time really were true. It probably also underscores the fact that maybe getting out and getting her own gym was long overdue. Probably a lot of things, privately and then professionally, some adjustments that they had to make were all well in order. But that southpaw stance, boy, it gave her fits. It gave her fits. Now, again, there were times when Peña was able to get the lead outside foot positioning and the right hand was there. You saw Daniel Cormier talk about the fact that there were times when where a lot of the fight took place like kind of, relatively in the center or something like that. But there were times when Amanda was close to the fence where she would back up and back up in straight lines to herself and then get caught a little bit. But short of that, Amanda dropping her. Let's pull up the numbers on this. Amanda dropping her. How many knockdowns? They awarded her 3. Felt like a lot more. They don't give her any knockdowns in the first round. That's interesting. I would have to ask Fight Metric what their definition is. Remember, they didn't count what Max did in dropping Volkanovski to a knee as a knockdown, but it felt like 1 watching in real time. They give her 3 in the second, and those were just enormous knockdowns. Jesus Christ. First round, she was getting rattled too. Again, the check hook, sometimes her own left straight. There were times when, I can't remember, I think this was in the second round, where she was doing the Fabricio Verdum bit to Stipe, where she, in this case, Peña would chase her to the fence line and then along the fence line. Dude, whenever you see that, whenever you see someone chase another person to the fence line and then chases them along the fence line, right, where their shoulders are both kind of facing the fence, someone's about to get dropped or badly hurt. It's BC, actually. BC just texted me. What's he saying? He's talking about last night's fights. He's a hardcore, bro. BC's a hardcore. Isn't that funny? Dude's on vacation. He's out there watching fights. So dude, not only that, taking her off of her feet, like Mike Thomas Brown did to who was the gentleman? Leonard Garcia. There's an old WEC fight where he hits Leonard Garcia, and Garcia literally leaves his feet as a consequence of just the drilling power of the punch. Amazing performance in that regard. So that was one big switch that was just absolutely giving Amanda Nunes fits. One of the other problems that she had was she couldn't really find an opportunity to clinch. That was another one. There was good clinch breaking, or just really good at putting good cage generalship by Amanda Nunes to put the fight in a place where she wasn't so vulnerable to having to, again, a couple of times she got backed up or whatever, but in general, putting the fight in a place where she was able to exit out or angle off or land a check hook or anything she needed to do to avoid those kinds of grappling contexts on Peña's terms. Now, that leads to like the other big change in this particular fight beyond physical preparation or injury or whatever else may have been going on professionally in her life, which was the offensive takedowns and top control of Amanda Nunes. The southpaw stance totally surprised me. Didn't see it coming at all. This one's not as surprising, the second part, for a couple of reasons. One, if she had her cardio in place, it's, I think, a lot easier for her to work on top and make use out of it. She did that in a Duran Demi fight, both the Duran Demi fights, actually. She did it in both of those. She's done it a few times where she's initiated takedowns and in top control, and she had savage ground and pound. Jesus, those elbows were hard. Even there was a couple times where she was standing and then raining down punches from a standing position, and those were all hard. Like, she had just outrageous ground and pound. But the reason that's not surprising, and this was the one stat I think I read this one on Friday, which was that the takedown defense, actually it's lower now as a consequence of this, but I think it was at 25% before. Peña's takedown defense is sitting at 23% historically. Like, she is a good grappler. Hello, she nearly had that arm bar in the fourth. But her takedown defense is historically not great. The numbers say at 23%. You can't say you have 23% historical takedown defensive rate among your UFC fights and then also say, not that you have bad wrestling, because again, I think she has good offensive wrestling. I think she has good offensive grappling. I think she has good offensive grappling from her back at times, for sure. But in general, when it's combined with the wrestling, it's top control on her, for her as well. But if you can take it to her, get her down, she'll largely just play guard. She's got a good guard. She's a threat there, but she'll largely play guard. She doesn't like do the Izzy thing where it's like urgency to climb back to your feet. She doesn't really do that. So I think they rightly assumed that if we can get the takedown and if you can get someone charging into you from the clinch, I think one time she landed in a Sotogari, which was the trip backwards. That was one of the first ones. Then she landed another one, which was, I think, a Harai Goshi, sort of the putting a leg in front of her 2 legs and then sending her over the top of it. So she landed 2 nice. I think it was the same attempt, but basically one of the times, I think Peña switched herself in the middle of it, and so one ended up being a backward strip, one ended up being a forward strip. It was the same kind of setup, just the same. They weaponized Peña's forward charging against her. Dude, they had a thorough, complete game plan. They had her, Amanda Nunes, in excellent physical condition, and they made good decisions about when to press the gas, when to press the brakes, what kind of fight it should look like early, and if you're having success, how to build on that late. They could have stayed standing perhaps if they had wanted to, but then they switched gears and went to another one and took her right off of her game, right off of her balance, right off of everything she had expected previously in the first 2/3 rounds, whatever it really was, what the turning point was with the takedowns. And Peña just had no answer. She simply, again, except for that 4th round armbar, and there was a couple of omoplata attempts, but they're not really close. For an omoplata to really work, you have to be high on their, close to the shoulder. I mean, ultimately it's the arm being manipulated to pop the shoulder out, right? It's like a Kimura with the legs, basically, is what an omoplata is. When you're down on the crook of the arm or even on the forearm, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. So it was nice that she was threatening from guard and forcing Amanda to work in that way, but it ultimately didn't result in enough action to, again, result in much. Now, that armbar was nice in the 4th, where she spun underneath and she extended, dude. And that thing, what you're looking for in those scenarios is you're trying to imagine, in a perfect scenario, what would a perfect armbar look like? One of the problems that got her was the arm was deep. It was extended. The elbow was well past the hip line of Peña, but the issue was Peña's heels were not very close to her rear end, so she wasn't getting that squeeze in compressing everything, nor with her knees being able to pinch all that tight. The other one was, if you watch Amanda's hand, what you want, and again, these are ideal conditions. You don't always have to achieve these to get an armbar, but in an ideal condition, what you want is the person whose arm you're armbarring, you want their thumb to face the sky. That would be an ideal condition. And you can watch Amanda go back and look at the 4th. You can watch her move her hand around to avoid that scenario. So even though the arm was deep, if I can get my wrist turned over, your elbow will follow the wrist, right? Everything's gonna move in conjunction. And so you saw her playing with that, and then she was able to hop around, catch the head of Peña with her own left leg, which enabled her to basically turn out of it just enough to stop it. It was a nice armbar attempt. I'll give Peña some credit. That was nice. I will also say about Peña, and this was the real big difference, the amount of adjustments between the first and second fight that Nunes made is extraordinary. Again, I just can't say enough good things about it. I really didn't see her being able to do that, and she did all of it. And she did all of it to the point of 50-45, 50-44, and 50-43. But I will say this about Julianna Peña. She might be the toughest person in UFC. That's Darren Elkins' old shoe leather tough. She was getting dropped left and right in the first 2 rounds. She was getting taken down, thrown around, off balance. Think about how many times Peña was standing at one point and then found herself on the canvas, whether she got tossed or whether she got hit or whatever the case may be, and then had to bring herself back up. And there were a couple times where she's able to extricate herself from bad situations and stand. It wasn't like she pulled a Douglas Lima in his last fight, for example, against Jason Jackson, where he would just lock up guard and nothing was happening, and he would just kind of relent to it. There were times where she was able to get her back to the fence and stand, or work on some kind of scramble and stand. But in general, not really. It didn't really work for her in that regard. But she took monster ground and pound and kept coming. She got, again, I think the number of times she got hit and then visibly wobbled, however Fight Metric counts the knockdowns, it must be 5 or 6 times? 5 or 6 times? That the changing of the hand, where instead of being your power hand, I'm left-handed, so instead of your power hand being here, I'm going to bring it here, and then catching her in that way with those hooks. Golly, dude. And by the way, she did it a lot of different ways. Sometimes it would be like a straight hook. Sometimes, again, it would be from the orthodox stance and it'd be a hook. But she didn't try and jab with her all that much. A couple times, not really. In general, what they wanted to do was use her jousting pressure and get around it rather than trying to meet it head on in this way and use it in a way where the angles. Really, that's what the switching was. I mean, I have to go back and watch to get a better appreciation of it. I've only seen it the one time, but it looked to me like what the switching was again it threw the straight work of Peña. It made it more predictable, obviously, for Amanda Nunes, given what she had faced in the first fight. What I mean is, really, it was just a function of the angles of the punches and the angles she was able to set by virtue. And again, it made her jab harder. There was a couple times where Peña was taking outside foot position, and that's okay if you're going to jab with them, right? Because there, you now have, if your foot is on the inside, you're now closer to them. So there's a couple times she would just let her have it, and then she popped her for it. Wow, dude. Let's look at some of these numbers here in particular overall. How about this? Amanda Nunes, 11 minutes and 49 seconds of control time. Just phenomenal. 6 of 8 takedowns. Jesus. Nunes whiffed on a takedown in the first. Oh, it's the third where everything begins to switch. In round 3, she had 3 minutes of control time. In round 4, she had almost 4 minutes of control time. And in round 5, she had 4 minutes and 21 seconds of control time. Let's look at targeting. You know what? And let's actually compare that to the last fight. I would love to see what that is. Granted, very different circumstances because it didn't go nearly as long. But, okay, so in this fight, the one on Saturday, Peña was headhunting. 90% to the head, 10% to the body. Nunes, not a huge difference, but enough of one where, by the way, I thought leg kicks would be a bigger part of her game. And they looked to be doing that at first. You saw a couple of oblique kicks. You saw a couple of leg kicks, and they were landing. You thought they were pretty good, but turns out she didn't really need them. 78% to the head for Amanda Nunes, 11% to the body, 9% to the leg. Now let's compare that to the first fight. In the first fight, yeah, big difference. Amanda Nunes didn't go to the body nearly as much, 2% to the body. Same amount to the head, 78%, and then 19% to the leg. So the big switch there would be, instead of doing the leg kicking, they invested more body work. And then for Julianna Peña, she went from 87% in this one, and then ultimately 90% in the one yesterday, and then 12% to the body. So Peña, again, I think Peña tried to fight the same fight. Amanda Nunes she wiped the slate clean. To be able to wipe the slate clean like that and come out and change your stances and then switch the whole fight up halfway through and do what she did, you know, obviously she got the belt back, so in that sense she is technically the champion. But I mean, that is just such, and dude, at 34 years of age, after however long she's been in the fight game, to have those kinds of skills and to rebound in the way that she did is so extraordinary. You know, they had that stat up where, you know, people who had lost their belt had really never gotten it back. They had a terrible winning record. The only times it was Couture, Figgy, and now it'll be her. But as I mentioned on Friday's show, the Couture one doesn't really count because if you guys ever watched that fight, right at the beginning of it, Vitor throws a punch. It doesn't even really land. It just grazes or, you know, barely makes contact. And it actually cut the eye of Couture, or excuse me, the eyelid of Couture, and they were worried he was going to lose his eye, so they had to stop the fight. It was like right at the beginning, and Vitor was like, "Yeah, you know, it's fine. Like, you know, things like that happen." And then in the rematch, it didn't go that way at all. Figgy in their third fight just straight up took it back from Moreno, and that was a close fight, dude. Here, she didn't just take it back; she went and mollywopped her, like, and in multiple dimensions, multiple phases of the game, over everywhere. There was no round. I mean, depending on what else could have happened in that fourth round, you could be like, well, maybe you give it to Peña, but because the armbar was good. But there wasn't enough. Like, here are the numbers in the fourth round. Again, these are numeric totals, not qualitative assessments. But the numeric totals, first round, you know, the numeric totals are pretty close, 21-25, Peña to Nunes. Second round, 25-19, which is crazy that she got more numeric totals. Sometimes you have to be careful with the stats because she got dropped 3 times in that. But then, this is the real story off of her back. She just couldn't get meaningful offense from there, either with elbows or enough of a guard game getting going. Nunes, 14 strikes. Peña, 6. Round 4, Amanda Nunes, 16 significant strikes. Peña, 4. Round 5, Amanda Nunes, 11 significant strikes. Peña, 4. Right? So she combined for 14 total significant strikes over the back half of that fight. The last 3/5 of it. That's nuts, dude. That's nuts. They made her think that we were going to have some kind of striking thing already from a confusing direction. And then as soon as she began to get, reasonably comfortable with it, or, was making some, she got dropped like a million times in the second, but there were times she was able to land a little bit. They switched the whole thing up right there. And again, judo trips, good top control, good submission defense, complete domination. Complete domination from Amanda Nunes. Really, I underestimated what she could do at this age. I really did. I totally underestimated what she could do. I thought that she had her moment in the sun, and then once you get to this point, there's really no coming back from it, given some of the precipitous declines we've seen. Nope. Not even true. Not true at all. What a masterful performance from her. Truly admirable in every way. You won't see fighters like that very often. I know I say that sometimes when we do these post-fight shows, but really, to turn in an effort so comprehensively thoughtful, smart, well-executed, brutal, damaging, phase-specific, that's tough. I don't think Peña had any idea. If you asked Peña, did you know you were going to be in for a tough fight? I'm going to guess she would have told you yes. But if you had asked her, what if I told you that Nunes was going to do switching to southpaw and she was going to hit judo throws, the Osoto Garis and Harai Goshis and everything else, and then there's going to be ground and pound and your best effort at omoplatas and triangles and arm bars. The arm bar will get close, but that's about it. Nothing else really will. I think she'd be shocked. You're gonna spend 12 minutes basically on your back. I just don't think she was prepared for that kind of a contest. I think she thought she was going to pick up where she left off, and I kind of thought so too. Nope, not at all. I think this is one I want to go through with a fine-tooth comb and see a lot of the different setups. I think some of the range management was really good, which enabled her to see what Peña was offering in those straight drives. Peña doing a lot of punching out here too, which not great, but the fact that she's tough and durable made that somewhat usable, even in the first fight. But that, the jab and which was a big part of the reason why she lost the first one, just wasn't in play. Wasn't in play at all. Dramatic, man. That's a huge win. I'll be curious to see what happens if they're going to do a Shevchenko fight. This is something we'll talk about on Morning Combat tomorrow, but nice job by her. All right, let's talk about that co-main. This is the one that I did manage to pick correctly, finally. Although it wasn't that hard, he was the favorite. But still, it was pretty close. Actually, Kai Kara-France did really well in this contest. So Brandon Moreno defeats Kai Kara-France at 4:34 of the third round with a liver shot. Man. I'll tell you this. I thought Kai Kara-France was looking pretty good. I know the scores were all over the place. I can understand why. I think I had first round Moreno, like the first fight. No, sorry, the other way around. Kai lost the first round of the first fight. So I had Moreno winning the first one. Second one was close. And maybe I might edge it out towards Kara-France. And then the third round starts happening, and you're like, this is like everything's coming up Kai Kara-France. And then it just didn't. Okay, so what were some of the big differences this time around? Still, Moreno did have some success in terms of what matched the first fight, namely being able to pressure Kai Kara-France backwards and then kind of corral him. Not nearly as much as he did in the first fight, but there certainly was some of that in this one. So it wasn't like Kara-France was totally free from that. That's interesting. But I thought Kai Kara-France, I do feel like, I said this on Friday, and I do feel like this holds up. His defensive wrestling and his defensive grappling has improved enormously. Enormously. He is, let's pull up the numbers on this one too. Let's see. He is so much better about being able to get his, you saw there was a couple times where Moreno was able to lock up something and put him along the fence and then just couldn't do fuck all with it. Let's go to the things here. Yeah, Brandon Moreno whiffed 0 for 3 on takedowns. Couldn't get a takedown on the guy. Barely any control time in either direction. 45 seconds for Moreno, just 24 seconds for Kara-France. So Kai Kara-France's defensive grappling, which you saw in the Bontarine fight and the Askarov fight, and then defensive wrestling, certainly in this Moreno fight, they're excellent. He really, really, really is a different fighter in that regard, and you can't take that away from him. I also thought, and this was you started to see this in the second fight, there was, like in the second round in particular, there were a lot of times where Kai Kara-France would go first to disrupt the rhythm, and Moreno would chase after him, and he wasn't there. Both guys, and I think this was largely a function of the way Kai was moving. We'll get to this in a minute. Kai was circling constantly to his right, so both ended up sort of orbiting each other in that way. But he would stick and go. Really nice job. And there were times when he would counterfight where he would intercept the jab by kicking out the post leg, finishing, or if he was going first, he'd finish a combination and then chop at that leg. That lead leg kick was vicious from Kai Kara-France. So he really had this interesting ability not only to like nullify all the grappling, but on top of it to disrupt Moreno's rhythm, to land damaging shots without taking a whole lot of damage himself. In fact, he absorbed fewer strikes than Brandon Moreno, just 53 to Moreno's 58. Obviously pretty close, but still technically a little bit less. But the reason why he got into a little bit of trouble is, it's funny. How did Figueiredo beat Moreno in their third fight? A lot of different ways, but one of them was, and by the way, you saw DC talk about the narrowing of the stance. It actually was a pretty good observation from DC, and Dean Thomas co-signed on it, and it did look pretty true. Not all the time. There was times he was getting a little bit wide with his base, but in general, he did it a lot. I think it made him fleet of foot. If you go back and you look at their first fight, and then you saw some of this in this fight as well, there was a lot of attempt to Kai Kara-France in the first fight had a bad habit of dipping off to his right. And you see Moreno throw a lot to that side to stop him from doing that. Now, they didn't really do that in this case, but I did think that he wanted to corral him and push him backwards. And so he was trying to throw kicks to that side from his left side to stop that. He would need a shuffle step to get it going, right? Because he's standing orthodox. Some guys can just throw it up like that, but he can't, or he just doesn't, not in that way. So he kind of shuffle steps into it, so you need a little bit of space. And so what you would see is in the first round and in the second round, more so in the first, there are a lot of head kicks thrown. But then in the second round, and actually go back, and I did see this, it's like in the third round, roughly at the 130 mark, it's the exact same kick that he lands that closes the show a little bit later. It is some kind of hand combination at distance, at range, to bring the hands up as Kai Kara-France goes back and exits to his right. That's to the left of Moreno. So they know he's going to swoop into it a little bit. They're going to try and stop him and corral him in that direction. They throw the hands to make him bring his guard up, and then he, does the switch step, the stutter step. You don't quite know what's coming, and then he throws it. And then you could see Kai Kara-France, the first one that he gets hit with the body at 130, he thinks it's coming to the head. And then the next one, I think he tried to get a hand around it because he wasn't quite sure. He was trying to play both, and it still snuck under it. Because if you think about it, when someone's angling back and then turning off to the side, their body is almost like go back and watch Lyoto Machida versus CB Dollaway. CB Dollaway opens his elbow just enough for Machida to sneak underneath there. So if the body is leaning that way and then there's this opening that way, just a little bit, not like Kai Kara-France has bad defense, hardly has bad defense. That was how they were able to get him with that. And so they would get him with that because what Figueiredo did was when you'd see those blitzes from Moreno, which usually all start with the hands, Figueiredo would just wait for it. And then when they would clinch, he would initiate, or he would just work into the clinch or go for the takedown. Kara-France retreats. And again, there's nothing wrong with retreating. There's nothing wrong with any of these things. But every choice you make, there will be there's so many variables. There's so many things that can go wrong or go right. It's hard to predict and stop every particular thing that any one of your opponents may choose. It looked to me like they were intercepting his constant movement to that side. They were using that against him. He was trying to get away from the right hand of Moreno. And as a consequence, they were able to use those long sweeping motions. Because Kai Kara-France, you saw this a couple times where he'll stand real far away, and then he'll throw, some kind of jab, and then overhand right, and then overhand left as he closes in on the opponent. You'll see those. He did that a couple times, not as many as he did in the first fight, and not as many as he does overall, but nevertheless, a lot. Again, a few times in this fight, but overall a lot in his career. Didn't do as much of that this time, but the point I'm trying to make here is, I'm a little bit confused. I've kind of lost my train of thought, but hang on one second. Where Figueiredo invited the pressure from the hands at boxing range and then turned it into a grappling contest. This is what I mean about guys having A and B games. If you guys listen to my live chat at all on my personal channel, you hear me talk about this all the time. There are exceptions to this. Like a Khabib is an exception. Izzy, to this point, has proven to be a bit of an exception to it, where if your A game is so strong, you can have a B game that can be somewhat defensive in nature or almost exclusively defensive in nature, and it won't necessarily cost you. So, for example, Kamaru Usman's got an A game, or at least through his career, his A game has been his wrestling. But if he needs to go to his B game, he'll punch your fucking lights out with that too, That's an example. But someone like Khabib, he can strike if he needs to, but that's not the reason why he won titles. He won titles by virtue of his overwhelming pressure and wrestling and grappling dominance. Izzy's got real good takedown defense. Again, everyone thinks, he doesn't have good takedown defense. He has tremendous takedown defense. He has tremendous get-up. He has good defensive work on his back. The Blachowicz fight notwithstanding. Like, he's hard to hold down. He's hard to take down. He's very, very good at resisting that. And because his striking is so far ahead of the middleweight division, he can get away with that. But unless you have that kind of superiority where your A game is so much better than all your peers, you need to have another gear in your B game to make it offensive. Remember, survive, defend, attack. Those are the levels. So he went past surviving, and he's got really good defense, but now you have to go on the attack with it. Figueiredo did that with Moreno. He did that. He invited the pressure, accepted it, and then turned it into offense from his grappling. And not every time. Like, there were times when obviously Moreno, would defend it himself or land a good shot. Like, it's not none of these systems are without error or compromise. But here they were using his long sweeping movements because, there's nothing wrong with sticking and moving. It's great. But Moreno loves to give chase. He loves to hunt down. He loves these blitzing and these drop shifts and then these, all kinds of stuff like that. And then the more general kinds of shifting he likes as well. He loves to go through that in these long arcs and then to use the kicks in the way that he was. First investing high, then with the hands high, and then going to the body. It's just solid work. It's just hard to get away from that when you're constantly scooping out, and you want to circle away. But all that has to be changed up, and I think the fact that his pressure was constantly him moving to his own right, he was not walking into it in that sense where he was like doing this, but he was moving in a direction where those kinds of targets of opportunities were going to present themselves, and they did. It's a great job. Some of the numbers here beyond that, Moreno was credited with a knockdown, obviously in the third when he just crumpled him. And Moreno was busted up too in this one. Was it the second round or the third? I can't remember. Again, I've only watched him one time now. I think it was the second round where he had the huge cut under his either right or left eye. Now it wasn't above, but it was big, dude. It was real swollen and it was mangled. That was a bad cut, but again, Kai Kara-France doing a really good job going first when he needed to, countering effectively when he needed to, sticking and moving for the most part when he needed to, but not having an ability to land, his hardest punch, being very defensive in the grappling, which is good, but there's no attack there. Nothing to really slow down Moreno. That was kind of the thing, right? Moreno was still moving and doing all the stuff he wanted to do and charging. He never really got... Moreno was hard to deter. He's hard. Figueiredo did about the best job you're going to see, but he's hard to deter. He's hard to, if you think about it, how do you get a guy off of you? I don't mean physically pressing them. I mean, giving them some kind of punishment or some kind of context that makes them regret engaging with you or makes them at least second guess it. He needed a little bit more of that. I think Kai Kara France. So, like, dude, he's a enormously improved fighter. He put out a tweet today saying, like, I'm still one of the best flyweights in the world. Damn straight. He absolutely is. He really, really is a tough customer. And he gave Moreno, for as long as that fight lasted, everything he could handle. He might have been winning that fight up until he ate that vicious body kick to the liver. But I got to tell you, man, James Krause, Moreno is amazing. He gets the overwhelming bulk of the credit. I do think it is fair to say that James Krause, what can a guy like James Krause offer a guy like Brandon Moreno? Brandon Moreno is insanely talented, right? He can do so many things. But a guy like Krause is just another smart guy with another pair of eyes who acts, think about it, it's like a writer and an editor. Like, the writer is the one who wrote those words, but sometimes you need someone else to come along and tighten things up here or there. Is there another way to say this? This is a little wordy. Fix this part. And then when it gets cleaned up and it looks a little bit better, man, what a masterpiece. It felt to me like James Krause was a great editor, so to speak, of the writing of Brandon Moreno. He really cleaned up a couple things, tightened up a few things, made him a little bit more mobile when he needed to, gave him good advice about certain combinations, and they knew what they were going to get with Kara France to an extent. They had a clear sense of what the mission was, it seemed like. And I think Kara France, if he was going to win that, I mean, maybe he could have won it, because I know he got to take down, obviously, himself in that third round. Maybe he could have done it like via stoppage, but it seems to me like Brandon Moreno. Let me go back and look at their first stats, actually, before I make that statement very cleanly. All right, so here it is, the first one. Okay, let's look at targeting in the first fight. In the first fight, Moreno went 85% to the head, 13% to the body. In the second fight, Moreno went 75% to the head, 20% to the body. So clearly a heavier investment in the body. That's you're going to need that with a guy who's elusive and on the move, right? He's hard to get to. You have to chase with your punches like Julianna Peña was doing. You don't want to do that. The kicks are going to be available. By contrast, Kai Kara France went 69% to the head in the first one, 12% to the body in the second one, 18. So 69, 12, 18. In the first one, in this one, 45 to the head, just 5% to the body, and then 49% to the leg. The leg kicks were great. They were great, but they're just not enough to deter a guy like that. So he actually lowered the amount he was doing in terms of like head and body damage, investment in the leg. The point I'm trying to make is that seems like a game plan that where you're banking on winning 3 of 5 rounds, or more than that, 4, potentially all 5. But that's not really like headed towards stoppage territory. The cut was bad, fair enough, but it just seems like that kind of game plan is built for scale rather than savagery. And of course, that's very easy for me to say and like critique. I'm not the guy that's out there, but that's an interesting switch. Moreno tightened things up. I think Kara France had a lot of switching and a lot of changing. I don't mean stance switching, although some of that too. And it got a little bit, I think he offensively muted himself to make better decisions. But in the end, that still wasn't, it just wasn't doing enough damage, even with that cut over the face, to Moreno to deter him or make him change. Figueiredo intercepting and then locking him up and then taking him down at times or whatever, that was a big deterrent. That really did switch things for him. Okay. We have much more to discuss. How about that Derek Lewis stoppage by Dan Miragliotta? Was it good? Was it bad? How about Alexandre Pantoja in 90 seconds just blowing the doors off Alex Perez? How about that? How about Magomed Ankalaev and then Anthony Smith's ankle injury and all the shit that went on in there? How about that? How about Drew Dober's win, which I saw some of the highlights of? We'll talk about all of those things on Morning Kombat tomorrow, 11 a.m. in the East. Me, Rashad Evans. We're also going to talk about the Jake Paul cancellation. I got a lot of thoughts on that. I was supposed to go to New York for that next week. Now I'm going to be home, so I guess lucky me, depending on your perspective. Although I had a feeling Rockmont Jr. was going to win, to be honest with you. I had a feeling Rockmont Jr. was going to win. I've been actually quite explicit with it. I thought Rockmont Jr. was going to win. So I've got some thoughts I'd love to share with you tomorrow, and I will. Plus, we'll talk a little bit about that Danny Garcia fight that I was covering for Showtime as well. But that's a bit of a taste for your main and co-main. There's so much more to discuss. So me and Rashad Evans live 11 a.m. in the East tomorrow. There'll be an extra credit. I'm going to do a UFC 277 live chat on my personal channel tomorrow at 3 p.m. So any question you have about anything on that card, any piece of detail I may have said here or anything else, let me know. You can go and fill up the questions for that right now, yeah? All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, sorry about this being tardy. Better late than never. I'll see you all tomorrow at 11 a.m. in the East for Morning Combat. Until then, may all your gains be loyal.